Welcome back. Good morning, my friend.
Good morning. Good morning. Happy July. I guess this is our first podcast in July, right?
It
That's-
is, and well,
Mhm.
we had our midweek podcast last week, just before the 4th of July, and I hope you had a
Oh,
very
that's
good
right.
4th of July. But we are surprisingly, perhaps, but maybe not surprisingly, we are here to talk about something other than the 4th of July. But we're going to talk about we're going to speak on a topic today that I think again is another topic that we spend a lot of time talking to patients and families about, and that is the topic boundaries. And
Mm.
there's we're tired.
Okay.
It's so difficult talking about boundaries because people have such, I think, such misconceptions, and they throw the word boundaries out. They throw words like trigger warning out, and they throw all these words out that have meaning in some various contexts. But I don't know that people really appreciate and really understand what boundaries are. And so we're going to talk a little bit about boundaries and um, what kind of effects that has on our lives.
Right. And when we began doing the research on this topic, I said, I kept saying to myself, I'm just tired of hearing about boundaries. I'm just tired of hearing it. And I thought, well, wait a minute, slow down a little bit. There's some value here. Why does it bother you so much? And I said, why does this? It's trigger warnings do the same thing to me. Having been a a teacher in college, I remember when trigger warnings were first introduced, and we were warned about, you have to give students a warning that you might be talking about something. So, and boundaries fall in that same category of why do you need these boundaries? What are you trying to do?
Mhm.
And so I felt the same way. And I'm particularly irritated, and I admit that's a flaw. I'm particularly irritated when I hear psychologists or coaches or personal coaches or therapists giving advice about how to set boundaries, how to set boundaries on the rest of the world, as though the inability to set boundaries is some sort of a skill deficit. And
Right.
I've never seen it as a skill that you need to develop. So we thought, let's begin with a couple thoughts that we have on boundaries, and then we're going to talk about two specific examples where boundaries can really get you into some trouble, trying to set boundaries. The first one is you don't set boundaries on others.
Right.
You don't have the right. I don't have the right to tell you where the boundary is. We
Right.
set boundaries on ourselves.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, it's so interesting because people will say, I mean, how many times have you heard people say, I set my boundaries and he just keeps going right past them. He just keeps busting right through my boundaries, and I just can't take it anymore because that's my boundary. No, you don't set boundaries on other people. You set
right.
boundaries for yourself. And it's not
Right.
so much a boundary. Maybe changing the word would help people better
Right.
understand it, because we don't think of it so much as boundaries as it's just, what is your tolerance level for certain things?
Exactly.
Like
Right.
I don't want people talking to me in a particular way.
Right.
So it's
Right.
not that I'm setting a boundary and saying you can't cross this boundary and talk to me that way. No, no, what I'm saying is that I'm only going to tolerate somebody talking to me like that for a
Right.
particular amount of time. And after that time, I'm just going to walk away, because I can't tell you not to talk that way. I can
That's
ask you
right.
to talk that way to me. If you
Mhm.
choose to continue, that's your free will, whatever you want to do. I just
Right.
don't have to be there to listen to it.
That's right. I'm not available for abuse.
Right.
But I like the idea of tolerance level rather than boundary. Okay. Second, there's a huge difference between setting boundaries on strangers or casual acquaintances and setting boundaries on loved ones. Um, there shouldn't be boundaries with strangers. You don't divulge private stuff to a stranger. You don't let strangers come up and just hug you for no reason. Um, but loved one, setting boundaries with them, that's normal social intercourse. So that part is okay. when it comes to setting boundaries on loved ones, to be very, very careful. Okay, that's quite a different issue. Third, when I hear people talk about the need for boundaries, it often feels to me like somebody is saying to me, well, I'm very important, I'm very popular, I'm very desirable, I'm so important that people are always encroaching, people are always imposing themselves on me. Uh, Unless you're a celebrity, you're not that important. I mean, you don't. It bothers me a little bit when people say, I have to keep my boundaries because otherwise people are always imposing on me. Um, no, I mean, you're like the rest of us. You know, you're really not that important unless you are a celebrity and you have to protect yourself. Okay,
Well,
very different
and I
thing.
think it's not so much it's yeah, people I don't think people think of themselves as celebrities, though they speak about it as though they are. I think it's that they, it's almost as though they come across that their feelings are so much more important than everyone else's. So
Exactly. That's
how
that.
how dare you impose upon me, and
Right.
you should, and sometimes people even the people, kind of using boundaries in this way, sometimes they even act as if others should just assume or know intuitively what the boundary is.
Yeah, you don't realize how important. You don't know how important I am.
Right.
You're not respecting. You're disrespecting me. I
Hmm.
get disrespected every day.
Right.
And everybody does, when you're disrespecting me. Like, yeah, it's called being human. You get disrespected,
Right. Right.
With family and close friends, setting boundaries isn't a skill that you need to rush to some self-help group to learn. When you get this sudden urge to set boundaries on loved ones, that's an emo. I'd like for you to see that it's simply an emotional reaction to some sort of relationship problem. You and this person, whether it's a spouse or a sibling or a child or a cousin, you've hit some relationship problem. There's some misunderstanding, some kind of breakdown in communication. But when you have those relationship squabbles, those little kerfuffles, does it really reach the level of a boundary violation? Like my
Right.
grandmother has violated my boundary. I
Right.
mean, does it really reach that level? And no, it really doesn't. These are normal relationship troubles that we encounter in our daily, weekly, monthly, yearly existence. Okay,
Yeah.
they're not really boundary violations.
Absolutely, because I think that what happens is, especially, I think that we tend to hear this, especially from younger people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I think it's because, they, as they're working through their identity and figuring
Mhm.
out who they are as they're becoming adults, they have all of these shifts and adjustments in who they are. And, they
Right.
suddenly, they came to the family get together on Thanksgiving,
Okay.
but then when they come to the family get together on Christmas, now all of a sudden they're a vegetarian. And they sit down and here's this big turkey in the middle of the table, and they feel like, oh, grandma violated my boundaries because
Jeez.
I'm a vegetarian now, and I don't know why she would put all this meat on my plate.
Right.
First, maybe grandma didn't know. And even if grandma knew, there are many people, me and my family were vegetarians, but there are many people who still assume that we eat poultry or that we eat fish, even though we're vegetarians. People still ask, does that include chicken or does that include fish? Yeah, it's all animal. So, you know, but people will say, oh, they violated my boundaries. She made me feel so bad. I felt so violated. I felt so. It's okay.
Disrespected.
It's yeah, disrespect. It's okay. Grandma just didn't know. Didn't
Right.
understand. I don't think she was trying to hurt you. It's okay.
No, no intent,
Mhm. Yeah.
Right. And then the biggest concern that I have is there's a very fine line between boundary setting and estrangement. And this is particularly true with intimate intimate relationships with loved ones. There's a very fine line between boundary setting and estrangement.
And I think that this is a huge one because we had a couple podcasts not long ago on estrangement and some of the consequences of that. but it does seem to be happening more and more often where someone will set a boundary and they will focus on it being a boundary, and they'll say, well, because they keep crossing my boundary, because they keep violating my boundaries, I am just not going to go see them anymore. I'm going to remove them from my life.
Right.
And that's,
Right.
you got to be careful with that. I mean, that's a pretty serious, that's a pretty serious decision to
That's
make.
taking a
Um,
very serious step in what might be a catastrophic direction.
right.
So we need to be very careful. And we're going to talk about that in the second part of this. We're going to talk about setting boundaries with strangers and casual acquaintances, and then setting boundaries with loved ones. And
Right.
we think there's a huge difference between the two.
Absolutely.
Setting boundaries with other people, people who are not family members or close friends, um, that's a reflection of your culture and your personal tolerance. There's some combination of the two. We shake hands in our culture. And of course, that goes back, most of you know, goes back to the 5th century BC, before the Common Era. And it was just a simply way of showing that I'm not armed. I'm coming to you in peace. I don't have any weapons. So you extend your hand and say, look, I'm not here to hurt you. Um, and for centuries, real men didn't hug. I mean, a generation or two ago, it was unthinkable that two men would hug. And then in the early 1990s, it became acceptable. And so now you see men hugging. You see, and men will shake hands and then hug, or they would just go up and hug each other. That was unthinkable 20 or 30 years ago. In Eastern Europe, men kiss each other on the cheek, and you've seen that on television. It happened to me when I went to Poland a couple of times, and that's the normal greeting that you get in those countries. So those are cultural things. But then you also have your personal boundary. Where are your personal boundaries? At one extreme, you have germaphobes who do not want to touch other people, period.
Mhm.
They don't want to hug. They don't want to shake hands. They just don't like close personal contact. On the other hand, you have huggers. You have people who just run up to you the first time they meet you, grab you, and give you a big hug.
Right.
You're somewhere, most of us are between those two. So you have to know, where are your personal boundaries, and
Right.
then decide that and then live accordingly.
Right. And there are a lot of famous examples of this, who is it, like Howie Mandel, right? He doesn't shake hands, but he does fist bumps. And so people who meet him, and of course he's a celebrity, so most people have heard of him and know him, but he doesn't do handshakes, he does fist bumps. And so people just know that that's his boundary, that he doesn't
Right.
feel comfortable with that. So yeah, when you're meeting someone new, you have these cultural, but also your personal boundaries that we use to govern our behavior. And when somebody behaves outside of that, that raises your antenna a little bit, and you're like, okay, that's interesting. I
Right.
had a little feller come in here, a patient come in not long ago, a couple of weeks ago, and I think he was like 4 years old.
Mhm.
And as soon as he walks in to my office, he walks up and gives me a hug.
Right.
Now, a 4-year-old
Now,
shouldn't be doing that.
what have we been taught, Bernie? What
Right,
did our professors teach us about that?
right. So, when a 4-year-old does it hugs a stranger, that's a bit concerning, because while that may be a family thing, and I got to check to see if that's something that they do in their family, that everybody in the family just hugs everyone when they first meet. I got to see if it's cultural things. If
Right.
it's none of those things, now I'm looking at, well, so now we have some social inappropriateness,
Right.
and so you start looking at different things. But so there are cultural things, there are expected personal things, and then we have to kind of gauge where we are in the midst
Mhm.
of all of that.
That's right. Yeah. So those are boundaries that you should set. That there are cultural boundaries, and you need to obey them. It's not in our culture, men don't kiss each other on the cheek. That's a different culture and perfectly acceptable. We do a handshake, we do a hug. But then there's your personal boundary. But again, like any other boundary, you have to decide where yours is.
Right.
Okay. You have a right to have your personal boundary. And if you don't want to be hugged, you simply extend your hand. And that tells the other person, I'm not a hugger, but I'll happy to shake your hand or give you a fist bump. Or now, I was watching a TV show last night, and it must have been filmed near the time of the pandemic, because when the star that when the guy who was sort of the star of the show, he walked up to a woman, this restaurant owner, and he offered they offered each other their elbows, and I thought, oh shoot, I forgot all about that. That was the greeting
Right.
during the pandemic, so that you didn't contaminate each other. I'd forgotten all about that. So these cultural norms
Mhm.
are okay. That those are good boundaries. Follow those. Have
Yeah.
your personal boundaries. Follow those. But that's with strangers and acquaintances. We want to talk now about boundaries with loved ones, because that's a very different issue. And I think fraught with danger, but also I think that we abuse these boundaries. We're using them, I think you said it, we use them incorrectly. We don't really understand them as well as we should.
Right. And I think that a lot of times people talk about boundaries with loved ones, and they do so very forcefully,
Mhm.
when they feel as though they are the victim of some type of abuse or mistreatment or
Mhm.
something like that.
Right,
And that may fall into a couple of different categories. There
right.
are certainly those people who are truly victims. They were victims of abuse or victims of neglect as they were growing up, or sometimes even as adults. They're true victims of abuse, and so they may suffer from PTSD or trauma or different things. And certainly setting a boundary with family members in those cases is really important, because they need to keep themselves away from the abusers or the people who have victimize them, and for their own personal well-being.
Right.
To me, that's very understandable that people would set those clear, um, very firm boundaries. And that's the kind of boundaries, by the way, that we're talking about here. We're talking about boundaries related to, again, that teetering into estrangement. Um,
Mhm.
we're not
Mhm.
talking about boundaries like like, are we going to have turkey or ham for Thanksgiving? Not those kind of boundaries.
Right.
We're talking about these really serious boundaries that
Mhm.
people set that can really damage relationships.
Right.
And so again, those who have truly been victimized, that's understandable, and those kinds of boundaries, or that kind of removal from those portions of the family, I think is very appropriate.
That's right. At the beginning of the podcast, we talked about setting boundaries. You have your own boundaries. You don't set boundaries on other people. So, in particular, if you're a victim of abuse, verbal abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, and it really is abuse. If it rises to the level of abuse, not that you were spanked once in a while or you were yelled at once in a while, but true abuse that was intentional and harmful and neglectful, then you may need to set your boundaries a little closer, make them a little smaller, and you are a victim, and you may need help at setting and maintaining appropriate boundaries to
Okay.
protect yourself. So we would say yes, if you've been the victim of abuse, you need to set and maintain pretty clear boundaries. But there's another group, and I don't know what you would call the second group, Bernie. Did you?
I, I
It's
I would
kind
just
of,
refer this as sort of self-perceived victims.
yeah, perceived. Yeah, it's my perception that I was abused,
Right.
or that I'm a victim, not even abused, that I'm somehow a victim.
Right, because you have within this category people, and again, we meet with people who have these kinds of issues quite often, where
Mhm.
it was, well, yeah, my parents did all these things for me, but what I really needed was these other things.
Right,
I've had 17-year-olds, getting really angry with their mother, telling their mother that, well, you're not the mother, you don't mother me the way I need a mother to mother me. I need you to mother me this way. And it's like, well, what does
right,
a 17-year-old know about how a mother should
right,
mother? So but there's that perception of abuse, and I think most people looking from the outside would say that doesn't really look like abuse. That just looks like you didn't get what you wanted, or it just looks like your parents maybe were a little bit more strict than you wanted them to be, or that your friends were. But they're seeing themselves as victims, and I think that that's the big thing, whether there's abuse or not, they're just seeing themselves as victims and categorizing themselves that way to the
Mhm.
point that they're making some decisions with boundaries that really can cause some damage.
Right. Yeah. And there are many examples of this, but this, I like the idea of self-perceived victims, or, and then there's within that is this category of self-important victims, that I am so important that I'm going to set my boundaries. And if you violate them, if you cross that line, and that's the line that somebody actually used. If you cross this line that I have, that it might be a mortal sin, and this might mean permanent separation. So there were two, and we have in the show notes two examples of this. And if it's, I'll just run through them very quickly. So we have this adult woman, and she's a mother, and she has not spoken to her mother for 5 years. She calls her mother a narcissist. But in the meantime, she has a grandmother, her maternal grandmother, who has been very supportive, loves her. They've had a long relationship. And she shared the mother shared photos of her child with her grandmother, said, "Don't give these to mom." And the grandmother felt the need to share the photos with the mother. And so the daughter, when she found out, had a near panic attack on the phone. And her first thought was, well, should I cut her out of my life? Should I cut her out of my life too? Now she's already not speaking to her mother. And now, because her mother shared some photos of the granddaughter, now she's saying, well, should I cut her out of my life too? This is a woman you have a relationship with, you've loved for a long time, you've loved each other, you've supported each other. So you're going to stop having a relationship with her. And I think, are you going to stop being her granddaughter? Are you going to stop loving her? Are you going to stop being loved by her? What does it mean? Should I get her out of my life? I don't know how to
Right.
do that. You
Right.
had to, you had to, I don't know what that means. I'm going to get you out of my life. I can't stop being your granddaughter.
Right. Right. But what they say is, well, I asked her not to share those photos, and she shared those photos, so she violated my boundaries.
Hmm.
Um, there's a difference, I think. There's a difference between compliance,
Right.
doing what I ask you or tell you to do, and crossing boundaries. That's, because when you think about this kind of situation, it's we don't have any reason to believe that the grandmother is going and reporting everything to the girl's mother,
Oh.
everything that she's doing all day, and trying to scheme and everything with the mother to
Right.
create this relation. She's not doing that.
Right.
She
Right.
felt as though this was something that was really important, that was happening in her granddaughter's life, that the granddaughter's mother should know about.
That's
Uh,
right.
That's a difference
She
of
said to,
opinion.
right. So the grandmother said to her daughter, whom she has a right to love, whether the granddaughter loves her mother is a different issue. The grandmother has a right to love her daughter.
Yeah.
And all she did was share these photos. She's respected all of the other boundaries that this granddaughter has put on her. She just shared a couple of photos just to say, here's your granddaughter. Okay. On the one hand, that was a gesture of love that she gave to her own daughter. It violated the granddaughter, but should it have reached the level of a boundary violation? And so, are you really going to divorce this person over this difference of opinion? And that's all this was. This was a difference of opinion.
Right.
And if you're going to end all of your relationships because of a difference of opinion, you're probably going to end up being pretty lonely, because I expect that, like the rest of us, you and even your loved ones are going to have differences of opinion of
Right.
how you interpret different things. And is there no room for, I mean, what this daughter is saying is, I don't have any room for differences in these intimate relationships. If you're not completely compliant all the time, then I have to end my relationship with you.
Right. It seems instead this should be a point of conversation. And
Exactly.
where she says, Grandma, let me explain to you why I didn't want my mom to see these photos, or let me explain to you why I don't want you to share this information. So to make sure that Grandma understands. Now, if you explain, have these explanations, and it makes sense why, okay, so these photos relate to this, which is why you're estranged from your mom. Okay, now
Right.
Grandma understands, and now Grandma, again, she still has her decisions to make.
Right.
You can decide what information you want to share with Grandma. You can say, well, you know what? I'm not going to show Grandma pictures like that in the future.
Right.
You can still have a relationship with her. You just don't share
Right.
photos that you don't want your mom to see.
Yeah.
Okay,
What I would, yeah.
that's not a reason for estrangement. We don't
No,
have to draw those kind of lines in the sand. We can just
right.
have a discussion and move on with our relationship.
That's right. You may not share the daughter may have decided not to share anything with her mother. Okay, that's your prerogative. You can't tell the grandmother what she can and can't do. That's not a boundary violation. You're asking her to be obedient. You're asking her to have and hold this opinion that you have. You can't impose. That's what we meant earlier when we said you don't impose boundaries on others. You impose boundaries on yourself. Once you've explained it to grandmother why you're doing this is why you're doing it. You can't tell her what to do. At the very best, you can stop sending her photos, stop sharing information. Don't send her photos. If that's the problem that she sent a photo, then don't send her any more photos. It'll be okay. All right.
Yeah,
So that's an easy problem to solve long before you get to boundary violations, and certainly before you get to estrangement. Don't push this woman out of your life. She's one of your most important supports. Okay.
absolutely.
So
No,
the second one,
good. Yeah,
um,
it's a good one.
this one really bothered me. So let me set the stage. It's post-pandemic. The grandmother has finally met her granddaughter, the different grandmother, different granddaughter. She's 5 months old. The baby's 5 months old.
Right. This
Grandmother's
isn't related to the first story. This is a
no, not related.
different family.
Different everything. They're on the back porch because it's post-COVID. And the grandmother notices that the mother's sort of sad. She probably had some postpartum depression. She wanted to lighten the spirit a little bit. And so the grandmother said, does it bother you that everybody says the baby looks like her dad? And as soon as she said that, she saw the reaction in her daughter-in-law. And as soon as she said it, she said, oh my gosh, I'm sorry that I said that. That I wasn't thinking. That was, and so she responded very quickly. And because as soon as the words came out, she started to apologize. And she followed that up a day later, I think the next day, with an email. I think she sent a Facebook or email or something or a text apologizing a second time and to her son and daughter-in-law and said, look, I'm really sorry. I spoke out of turn. That was stupid and thoughtless of me to do that. I apologize to you guys. And the son at that point was very angry and said that upbraided her, criticized her for saying that. And despite the apologies, the two heartfelt apologies, her son and daughter-in-law felt that she had crossed a line. The son told her that, Mother, you've crossed a line here. And I thought to myself, what line? What
Right.
line? Whose line? What are you talking about? And
Now,
then and then he
again,
went,
just to clarify, the grandmother said that the baby looked like the father,
right.
who was the one now telling her that she crossed the line.
Right, right. So I'm still not sure what this I mean, why they found that so offensive. Was it what she said, or was it she didn't? I don't know, but that's all the information we have. Anyway, the son and the daughter-in-law are very angry. They go back and talk about it for a few days. And after this discussion, the son notifies his mother, we are going to take a break from you. Once again, I mean, I don't know what does it even mean to say, I'm going to take a break from you?
Right.
Someone misspoke. A relationship was damaged a little bit. Okay. There was some communication problems. But we are going to take a break. That doesn't repair the damage.
Right.
It's like the first story where if something, the problem was the photos, okay, then fix that problem. But to say we're going to take a break from you, and to make matters worse, their daughter-in-law got on Facebook and announced to the world that they were going to take a break from the grandmother for a couple of weeks. Well, it's turned out that it's been a break that lasted more than 5 months. Okay.
Right.
And so you begin to ask, I in a therapeutic setting, I would say, did she intend to hurt you? No. Did she acknowledge that it hurt your feelings? Yes, she acknowledged that she made a mistake. She apologized. It was a heartfelt apology. Um, and if I understand this situation correctly, this couple has drawn some lines around their family, and anybody, including your own mother, anybody who crosses those lines is going to be kicked off the island. They're out. We're done with you.
Right. And it seems to be for in this example, as well as in many examples that we see here in our clinic,
Mhm.
those boundaries, those lines in the sand aren't really well advertised. It's like
Right.
people
Right.
don't even necessarily know that they're crossing a line.
Right.
And until then afterwards that they're informed. And again, it could be heartfelt apologies, it could be, great, people sometimes go at great lengths to
Mhm.
apologize, try to make amends,
Right.
but it doesn't matter
Right.
because the way that these folks feel sometimes is that that boundary was crossed, I'm done. And
Right.
and it's not crossing a boundary, it's creating estrangement. And estrangement is such a painful process. And I
Right.
think perhaps since the pandemic, it appears as though it's been easier and easier for people to do this, perhaps in part because we spent a year or so where we were separated from everyone. I still have people that I talk to who say they're going to visit family this summer, and it's still the first time that they've seen them since 2019. So,
That's right. Yeah.
the pandemic did create these separations, and
Mhm.
perhaps it just helped people or created a scenario where people now see it as easier to do to set these lines and to create these estrangements. But estrangement is a painful process,
Right.
and it can really be damaging. And I guess our real concern is that people misrepresent or confuse boundaries from estrangement, and they see them as the same thing, and those are very, very different things.
No, you don't want to cross from setting boundaries to estrangement. Estrangement, as you say, it's a painful process. But there was a therapist, or I don't know, advice giver, who said um, estrangement is a painful process, yet knowing how to and when to set boundaries is crucial to caring for yourself. There's something about that statement that just grates on me, and I'll keep working on it. And if you have any advice, I'll take it. And you don't have to worry about crossing any boundaries with me. Um, I don't. It just creates more harm and more distance. This whole idea that you're not going to talk to somebody, you're going to shove somebody, you're going to push somebody out of your life. It creates further harm and distance.
Mhm.
And when I hear people talk about self-care, you have to care for yourself. Is it self-care like self-help is not all it's cracked up to be. I mean, I think
Not
we need to
always.
cool down this self-help business. I mean, how much help do you need? But also, when does self-care become selfish? And that's my concern, is that you're so concerned about taking care of yourself. When does it cross over to just being selfish? Because you have an obligation to other people too. It's not just about you. It's not always about you. You
Right.
have an obligation to have relationships and to repair relationships with especially people who are close to you, grandparents, parents, siblings. We have an obligation to be with others. So I think let's think a little bit less about what we need, and because what we need is we need people in our lives.
Right.
And when we set these boundaries and we start kicking people out, you don't want to die alone. I can assure you.
Right. Setting boundaries in this situation, estrangement isn't setting a boundary. That's avoiding. If
Right.
you want to set boundaries, you set a boundary by saying, you know, I will talk with grandma, and you know what, I'm just not going to share pictures
Right.
my anymore. But I can still visit with her. I can still have a relationship with her. We can still have that. Or in the second scenario, the boundary could be, again, I'm suffering. I'm really having a hard time with postpartum depression. And it is really hard for me to hear people say that the baby looks like him, because it already makes it difficult for me to feel real connected to the baby because I'm having this postpartum depression. So, it really hurt me when you said that. But, if you could help me by kind of avoiding those kind of comments in the future, that'd be great.
Yeah.
That's setting a boundary.
Yeah, and I could use your help by doing these things with us or for
Right.
us. If you just come and just sit and take care of the baby while I take a nap or something, that's repairing the relationship.
Right.
Estrangement makes the it further damages
Right.
an already troubled relationship. So
Absolutely.
be careful with boundaries, especially with loved ones.
Absolutely. And if we put the link in the show notes for a couple of different articles and some examples and stuff. But if you have questions about boundaries, or you have questions that you would like us to delve a little bit more into, write to us and let us know. We'd be happy to talk more about this. So that is it for today. Until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.